Chapter 4. The wind off the ocean seized the tree branches and rattled them fiercely. Starflight dug his talons into the ground. It wasn't that he'd forgotten to wonder who his parents were. It was more that he was terrified to hear the answer. A father like Marosier, or Vengeance, or a mother like Greatness, or Fierce Teeth. Perhaps it would be better never to find out, rather than have his dreams meet the inevitably awful reality. But suddenly, the idea that a real dragon, somewhere on this island, was connected to him and might care about him was almost too much to bear. It's what Sunny and I always talked about, finding our parents. My father? He whispered. Didn't you know who he was before? There were a few possibilities, Marosier said grimly. But only one other dragon I know talks like you. He talks like me. Well, this is guaranteed to make him even more insufferable, Marosier muttered, shredding the other albatross wing and stuffing scraps of meat in his mouth. He's been claiming it was his egg for the last 6 years. Can I meet him? Starflight asked. Oh, there's no getting out of that. Marosier's tail twitched. I'm surprised he didn't track you down the moment you were dragged in. Must be in the middle of another big experiment. Nose in his scrolls. Probably hasn't even noticed that we're about to go to war. He wants to meet me. He'll be looking for me. What about my mother? Starflight asked. Could I meet her? No, Marosier said, plucking a feather off his tongue. Dead. Died a few years ago. Oh. Starflight didn't understand the wave of sadness that seemed to punch him in the chest. He hadn't known her. She'd agreed to give up her egg for the prophecy, so she couldn't have been very attached to him. She was probably as bad as Coral, or Clay's mother. Still. How did she die? Starflight tried not to look at the mess Marosier was making of the albatross. Dune and Kestrel had always insisted on strict table manners and cleanliness, since they were all trapped under the mountain together, in just a few caves with nowhere to escape to if someone ate their prey in a loud, annoying way. How did she... She got herself involved in a battle. Tried to help a sea wing who'd been attacked by 2 sky wings. Marosier grunted. Idiot. So obviously you didn't get that brain from her. He narrowed his eyes at Starflight and waved one of the bird bones at him. Enough. I have questions for you. I really don't know anything, Starflight said in a hurry. How dangerous is that rain wing? Marosier asked, ignoring him. Our studies indicate that most rain wings care only about themselves and prefer everything to be easy. Accurate. Starflight nodded. He really desperately didn't want to betray Glory in any way, but he couldn't think of a way to avoid Marosier's questions or lie to him when Marosier was sure to read the truth in his mind. To his surprise, Marosier's shoulders relaxed. That's what I thought, he said. So perhaps they won't do anything. Perhaps they'll roll over and go back to sleep. Starflight realized that Marosier had misunderstood him. He'd only meant that laziness was true of most rain wings, but the Nightwing had heard that it was true of Glory as well. Maybe, he said noncommittally. He tried not to think about how Glory would never let this go, how she would fight tooth and claw to rescue the Rainwing prisoners. It had been strange seeing her like that, as if she'd borrowed Tsunami's ferocity for a day. For years, Glory had acted as though she didn't care about anything. But apparently, imprisoning and torturing members of her tribe was one way to get her attention. He remembered what the council had said. What plan was the council talking about? He asked. What is it we don't want the Rain Wings to know? He stumbled over the words, trying to say we, as if he could be part of this tribe. But he wanted Marosir to feel as if Starflight was on his side, that he could be trusted. It was a trick he'd seen Sunny use a few times when Glory and Tsunami were fighting. Why are we mad at Tsunami today? Now, what has Glory done to us? And it often worked. Not this time, though. The less you know, the better, Marosir snapped. You'll get in less trouble that way. That wasn't generally Starflight's philosophy. He'd say knowing more was always better than knowing less. Marosir ripped the last chunk of flesh off the bird and spat out several more feathers. If you're determined to starve, he muttered, and devoured the wing he'd thrown to Starflight in a few bites. Very well, he grumbled. Let's go see Mastermind. He flung the remains of the bird into the bushes and jumped into the sky. Then I'll take you to the alternates, he said over his shoulder. The what? Starflight asked. But Marosir was winging away quickly and didn't look back. Starflight followed him, still thinking about the way Nightwings hunted. It explained a few things, including the bad breath on all the dragonettes in the dormitory. Oddly, Deathbringer didn't seem to have the same smell. Starflight wondered if the assassin spent more time on the continent than other Nightwings and had learned to prefer live prey over carrion, like most dragons. Ahead of them, the Nightwing fortress loomed, black against the gray sky. It was massive, built in layers that wrapped halfway around the mountain, but it also looked somehow precarious, as if one rock shelf could shift underneath it and the whole thing might suddenly slide all the way into the ocean. In fact, Starflight squinted. It was hard to see at first, black on black in the dark, smoky air, but as they got closer, he was sure. Part of the fortress had been swallowed by lava, clearly some time ago. A whole corner of the building, at least as big as Queen Scarlet's gladiator arena, was covered by a hardened mass of black rock bubbles. It looked like a giant dragon had reached out of the mountain and slammed its talons down over the walls. Starflight glanced up uneasily at the plume of steam rising from the top of the volcano. Orange-gold fire glowed from inside, and he knew that streams of molten lava ran down at least one face of the mountain, toward the caves where the Rainwings were trapped, if Glory's description was right. Surely another eruption could come any time, endangering the rest of the fortress. That thought made him even more nervous about following Marosir back inside, but he didn't have much choice. The large Nightwing ducked into a mouth-like opening on the highest level of the fortress. The tunnels here were lit with hanging chandeliers of torches, as well as the niches of coals Starflight had seen before. The stone under his talons felt smoother and more polished, as if it was frequently swept or mopped, unlike the lower tunnels. Starflight thought of the gold dragon prince in the Sky Palace, the emerald-studded throne in the Kingdom of the Sea, and the colorful flowers that wound all around the Rainwing village. There was nothing like that here. Nothing to break up the monotony of the stone walls. Nothing to showcase the wealth and power of the Nightwings. Then again, I guess no one ever comes here, he thought. Instead of trying to impress other dragons with opulence, they do it with mystery. He could see how that would make sense, but it would have been nice to see something besides fire and rock in all directions. As they turned a corner, Starflight paused and looked back. He thought he'd heard, but maybe he was imagining things. But it had sounded like claws, tip-tapping on the stone behind them. He stared along the dark tunnel and suddenly had a shivery feeling of hope. Maybe it's Glory, he thought. Maybe she's here and camouflaged. Maybe she's come to rescue me. He couldn't imagine how she would have gotten past the Nightwing guards who must be posted around the hole. In fact, if he were in charge, he'd have stuck a Nightwing in the tunnel at all times, just to be sure no one could invisibly squeeze by. But maybe the Nightwings weren't that smart. There it was again. Tap, tap, tap. Definitely talons, although whoever it was wasn't doing a terrific job of being stealthy. Glory is much better at sneaking than that. Maybe Clay? It was awful how much his chest hurt with hope. If only it were Clay. If only that big brown head would poke around the bend, see him, and grin. Starflight promised the universe that he would never, ever make fun of Clay again, if only the Mudwing would suddenly be here, rescuing him. "Keep up!" Marosier growled from up ahead. Starflight realized that he was really being an idiot. If someone were trying to sneak up behind them to rescue him, it wouldn't much help if Starflight stood there staring at them. He started to turn to follow Marosier, but just then, a head did poke around the last corner. It wasn't Clay, or Glory, or Tsunami, or Sunny. It was just a Nightwing Dragonette. She stared right at him for a startled moment, and then he shrugged and turned away. But at the same time she yelped, "Oh my gosh, it's you!" and bolted up to him, grabbing his front talons. "I had a vision about you," she declared grandly. He froze in the act of trying to pull his talons away. "Have you had any visions about me?" "You did?" Starflight said, blinking. She appeared to be his own age, so if she was having visions, that meant Dragonettes did develop their powers before they were full-grown, which meant Starflight should have something by now. But he didn't. Whenever he tried to read minds or see the future, it was like staring into the night sky, empty and cold and meaningless. He hadn't admitted that to Marosier yet. Speaking of whom, the floor now trembled ominously as the older Nightwing came thundering back along the tunnel to them. His eyes nearly popped out of his skull when he saw the new Dragonette. "Fate Speaker!" He roared so loud that Starflight thought the volcano might erupt right then. "I told you to stay in your cave with the others." "I know, I heard you," she said cheerfully. "But I got bored and I wanted to explore, and I saw you flying by, so I thought I'd come too. I can't believe I'm in the Nightwing Fortress at last. I've had lots of prophetic dreams about it, you know," she said conspiratorially to Starflight. She still had his front talons pressed between hers. Although, in those, it was actually bigger and lighter and smelled way less terrible, plus it had a lot more treasure and seriously less grouchy dragons. She thought for a moment. Maybe they were just regular dreams. "Fate Speaker," Marosier hissed. "What did I say about keeping your visions to yourself?" "You said, 'Shut up about your visions, I'm not remotely interested,'" Fate Speaker answered. "But that doesn't mean this dragon isn't interested. Aren't you interested?" she said to Starflight. He was, but he did not think it would be wise to admit that in front of Marosier, who had smoke rising from his nostrils. Starflight tried to study the Dragonette without obviously staring. Fate Speaker's black scales shimmered with underscales of deep blue and purple. Like Starflight's wings, hers were scattered with silver scales on the underside, so they looked like part of the night sky. But unlike his, Fate Speaker had several extra silver scales, one at the outside corner of each eye, a band circling one ankle, and a few lone ones sparkling along her tail like starry freckles. "Anyway, I just know you're terribly important," she said to him, releasing his talons, "and that we have a great destiny together." "We do?" he thought hopefully. Perhaps he was going to survive the Nightwing Fortress after all. Am I actually useful in this great destiny? Are my friends there? Am I with Sunny? He wished he could ask her questions without Marosier breathing furiously over their heads. "Go back to the others," Marosier ordered. "Oh, can't I come with you?" Fate Speaker asked. She gave Marosier a pleading look. "I foresee that I'll be really helpful with whatever you're about to do, also that I'll find it totally interesting." "I don't think that counts as foreseeing," Starflight said. "It sounds more like guessing." Marosier growled deep in his throat. "Very well. Keep your mouth shut and don't get in the way." "As if I would," Fate Speaker said happily, immediately tripping Starflight with her tail. Marosier stomped away, muttering. Fate Speaker gave Starflight an enormous smile that reminded him of Sunny. He wondered if Sunny missed him, and whether she felt anything like the ache that filled his chest whenever he thought of her. Oh my, sad face, Fate Speaker said, nudging Starflight's wing as they walked. Cheer up. What's your name? That wasn't in your vision? Starflight tilted his head curiously. He'd always wondered how much detail the visions had. The prophecy Morrow Seer had delivered years ago was remarkably cryptic, but perhaps there was more information in the seer's head that he hadn't shared. Fate Speaker wobbled her head back and forth, squinting thoughtfully at him. Oh, of course! Big toes. What? Starflight glanced down at his talons, a little offended. No, it's Starflight. Oh, she said. Are you sure? Quite sure. She shrugged. Well, I was close. Hi, Starflight. I'm Fate Speaker. You're probably wondering why you've never seen me before. Starflight paused mid-step and frowned at her. Am I? It's because I didn't grow up here. She carried on blithely, without noticing his reaction. Morrow Seer's growl echoed down the corridor, and they both started walking faster. I only got to the island yesterday. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I was raised by the talons of peace. Starflight walked straight into a chandelier. He staggered back, his head spinning. Oh, ouch, Fate Speaker said. She patted his shoulder gingerly. That looked painful. Anyway, so it turns out I'm part of that big dragonette prophecy everyone is so excited about. Can you believe it? No, Starflight thought. I'm the Wings of Night, she said proudly. Morrow Seer says it's up to me to stop the war. For some reason, he seems kind of grumpy about that. Starflight felt all his hope flicker and go out. He'd been praying quietly that maybe this was another Nightwing intervention to point him in the right direction. He'd hoped, perhaps, he'd be given another lecture and then sent back to his friends. But apparently, Fierce Teeth was right. He was here because he'd failed. And Fate Speaker was his replacement. Chapter 5. It made sense. Fate Speaker had powers, and Starflight did not. He'd failed to follow Morrow Seer's orders more than once. He was a useless Nightwing, and a useless Dragonette of Destiny. Wow, Fate Speaker said, finally noticing his expression. You look like someone just ate your only walrus. Are you all right? Starflight began. I just thought. They came around a bend in the tunnel and nearly stepped on Morrow Seer's tail. He gave them a glare that shut Starflight up in a hurry. Fate Speaker, however, was undaunted. Labs, she read off the door in front of them. Ooh, what does that mean? It means don't touch anything, Morrow Seer said grimly. We are here so Starflight can meet his father. If we're very unlucky, he'll have time to give us a tour of all the experiments he's working on, he hissed. Let's get this over with. The door swung open to reveal a huge room, more brightly lit and cleanly kept than any other part of the fortress that Starflight had seen. They were standing on a balcony. There was a level above them and a level below them, and a crisscrossing network of strange pipes stretching across the space in front of them. No, cried a voice. A whip-thin black dragon shot down from the top level and hovered in front of them. He wore an odd helmet over his whole head, with only a few small holes poked in it for him to see out. Rather like the Queen's council screen, Starflight thought. I must not be interrupted. This experiment is at a critical juncture, and greatness says I might be shut down at any moment. Everyone please leave. He flapped his wings and front talons at them. Mastermind, Morrow Seer said coolly. It seems you were right all along. The dragonette from Farsight's egg is apparently your son, and he's here now, so I've brought him to meet you. Starflight tensed, expecting the other dragon to shrug and shoo them away. But instead, Mastermind reached up and removed his helmet, revealing a snout pockmarked with little scars and curious bloodshot eyes. "My son?" he said, and Starflight felt a happy shiver at the tone of wonder in his voice. Mastermind landed on the balcony beside them, set his helmet on the floor, and took Starflight's shoulders in his talons. "3 moons," he said. "What a handsome dragonette. He does look like me. I knew he would. As I suspected, this jawline is genetically dominant." He gestured to the same spot on himself and on Starflight. "Ah, and yes. See the way the star scales on our wings spray outward like a splash of water, whereas Marosiers, for instance, curl inward, more like a snail shell." He flared one of his wings and then reached for Marosier's, but the larger Nightwing batted him away with a snarl. "All theories at this point, of course," Mastermind said, and Starflight found himself smiling back at his father's toothy grin. "A larger data set would naturally be essential for proving anything, but one is much better than none. Entirely wonderful, in fact. Especially compared to most of the rest of the tribe. Including yourself, right, Marosier? No dragonets, as yet?" Marosier's face indicated he did not intend to dignify that with a response. "But I have a son," Mastermind said proudly. "I, of all dragons. Let's see Strong Wings laugh now. Just wait until everyone sees my handsome offspring." He clapped Starflight's shoulder again. "So strong and healthy. You can be the assistant I've been looking for. What are you interested in, son?" Son. Starflight's knees felt as if they might not hold him up very well for much longer. Everything," he stammered. "Scrolls. I like scrolls." "Fantastic," Mastermind said. "I've lots of scrolls. How about desalinization? Know anything about it?" Starflight perked up. "A little. Taking the salt out of seawater to make it potable, right?" "Potable?" Fate Speaker interjected. She was watching them with wide, startled eyes, and Starflight remembered that she didn't know yet that he'd been raised away from the island, too. "Drinkable," Starflight explained. "Is that what those pipes are for?" "Very good," said Mastermind, waving his talons excitedly. "We have only one freshwater source on the island, and it's become rather contaminated with ash over the last few years. So I invented this magnificent contraption to provide safe water for the entire tribe." He talked on, pointing to the various pipes and explaining the science behind the process. Starflight listened with fascination. He'd never met a dragon who seemed so full of information, like a walking library of scrolls. Come, Mastermind said eagerly, gathering his helmet and leaping off the balcony. "I'll show you what else I'm working on." Starflight glanced at Marosier for permission, and the large Nightwing rolled his eyes and sat down with a yawn. Fate Speaker didn't wait to be invited. She flew behind them as Mastermind led the way down to the bottom level. "Here is where I do all my volcanology," he said, striding between tables laden with cauldrons of lava and steaming holes dug right into the ground. "I'm testing for materials that can withstand eruptions and working on scale models of barriers and outlining possible implementation systems. No wonder I need an assistant, right?" "This place is pretty cool," Fate Speaker said, glancing around at the volcano experiments. "It's amazing," Starflight said. He peered down at the smoke issuing from a deep hole. He wanted to study each section of the lab in careful detail. There was a strange contraption in the corner that looked as if it was designed to fit entirely around a dragon and then be filled with something. Water, maybe? He couldn't even imagine. He already had a million questions and a couple of ideas about lava that might be worth testing if his dad didn't mind some suggestions. Mastermind flicked his tail at a corner of the lab where tiny versions of the mountain had been constructed with little fortresses stuck on the side. Several of them were already smoldering ruins. "Not going well, as you can see." He laughed a little, almost nervously. "Queen Battle Winner isn't pleased about that, of course. She has her own ideas about where I should be focusing my attention. Come. He lifted off toward the top level. Starflight took one more look around, wondering what could be more interesting or important than protecting the tribe from the volcano. I wonder if he's done any research on nightwings infecting the prey they bite. Maybe I could help him study it. He shook himself, blinking. Sounds like I'm planning to stay. He glanced at Fatespeaker, then quickly away at one of the smoking jars of lava. I might not have any choice about that, but they have to let me see Sunny again. If I'm trapped here forever, without her, without even a chance to say goodbye? Come on! Fatespeaker interrupted his thoughts, tugging him into the air. They hurried after Mastermind and discovered that the third level was another balcony, with several doors ranged around it, each one marked with 3 or 4 different symbols. Starflight's father stopped in front of one door and rubbed his front talons together. About a year ago, we discovered a truly astonishing natural phenomenon. You won't know about this. The Talons of Peace have no idea. None of the other tribes do. Our understanding of this biological anomaly is as yet so new and incomplete that we haven't even put it in any scrolls. Certainly not the ones we distribute on the mainland, but also not even the ones that are for Nightwing eyes only. I'm preparing a treatise on the subject, but there's still so much to learn that I have no idea when I'll think it's ready for publication. You see, he said, leaning toward them, it turns out one tribe of dragons has evolved an unusual defense mechanism. They can shoot venom from their fangs. Deadly, toxic venom that essentially melts any animal or plant matter it comes in contact with. And you'll never believe which tribe. He didn't wait for them to guess. Rainwings. Rainwings? Fatespeaker echoed in a surprised voice. Starflight's heart was sinking. He suddenly had a feeling he really did not want to see what was behind these doors. Let's see. We'll start here, Mastermind said. He opened one of the doors to reveal a long, narrow stone room. A set of silver shackles with very short chains was bolted to the floor near the entrance, and all along the length of the room, black marks scarred the floor and walls, with indecipherable notes scribbled beside each one in chalk. Starflight stared at the shackles, feeling ill. Mastermind hopped down the room, avoiding the black patches, although they all seemed to be hardened and harmless, like old lava. This was one of our first questions, naturally, when we first learned that rainwings could shoot venom. How far? Was it a short-range weapon or a long-range weapon? Would we be able to approach and incapacitate them if we developed projectiles that could be fired from a safe distance? He stopped at the far end of the room and indicated a mark on the floor. This is as far as I've seen any one dragon shoot, an older male rainwing. So my hypothesis is that it's a skill that gets stronger as they age. He rubbed the horns on his head, frowning in thought. I wonder if they have any elderly dragons we could bring over and test. Bring over, Starflight thought bitterly, as if they're invited guests instead of abducted prisoners. Fatespeaker was eyeing the shackles nervously too. She looked as if she didn't know quite how to ask about them. The next obvious question is, what materials aren't affected by the venom? Anything we could use as armor or a shield? Mastermind went on, hopping back up the room toward them. Come, come! He ushered them out and over to the next door. We had to devise ways to study the dragons without placing ourselves in danger, naturally. Very few rainwings have ever deliberately tried to shoot their venom at us, but it goes very badly when they do. It's quite horrifying, really. He opened the door and swept his talon toward the tables inside. Items of different shapes, sizes, and materials were arranged in related groups. One table contained a gathering of sad little plants in pots, drooping yellow flowers dripping with black. Another was all rocks. And a third. Starflight looked away quickly when he realized that the trays all contained remains of living things. Sloths, lizards, fish, that hadn't survived the experimental process. Ew! Fatespeaker cried. We've tested it on everything, Mastermind said proudly. Turns out it doesn't affect metals, so... He banged on his helmet, which gave out a muffled clang in response. But anything alive, plant or animal, it just destroys. If it gets in your eyes or your bloodstream, you're dead within minutes. If it only hits your scales, you'll wish you were. We have a couple of recent victims I'll be getting to study as soon as they're released from the healers. He rubbed his talons together again. If you're lucky, I'll let you take a peek, he said to Starflight. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see what rain-wing venom can do. I know what it can do, Starflight choked out. I've seen it kill 2 dragons. Possibly 3, if Queen Scarlet is dead. He thought of Fjord, the first dragon Glory's venom had killed, the Icewing, who had been about to kill Clay in the arena. Some of the poison had landed on the open wounds on Fjord's neck. That must have been why it killed him so quickly. And Crocodile, the Mudwing who had betrayed the talons of peace and led the enemy right to the Summer Palace. When Glory killed her so they could escape, her venom had gone right into the dragon's eyes. But Queen Scarlet... He shifted uneasily. If he remembered right, Glory's spray of venom had landed on the side of the Queen's face, so she really might still be alive. Alive, and looking like vengeance, which didn't bode well for the dragonettes. Mastermind stared at him avidly. 2 dragons. Killed them. Are you sure? How incredibly careless. We haven't picked up any rain wings with that little control yet. It wasn't careless. It was on purpose, Starflight said, annoyed on Glory's behalf. Fate Speaker sucked in an astonished breath. Well, I never. Are you sure? His father's wings flared. He looked equal parts alarmed and enthralled. That changes things entirely. A variable I hadn't considered. You'll have to tell me all about it. What prompted the attack? What it looked like? How long it took the victims to die? Whether there was any time to fight back? Starflight realized, too late, that he shouldn't have said anything. If this information got back to the Council, they'd know how dangerous Glory was. He had to hope that Mastermind was too wrapped up in his experiments to tell anyone. My. Mastermind headed toward the next door. Well, knowing the venom only worked on certain substances led us to the next project. Constructing armor that could withstand a rainwing attack, if necessary.
But it isn't necessary, Fate Speaker chimed in. Rainwings don't attack other dragons. Everyone knows that. She looked at Starflight. Well, they're not supposed to.
Even a rainwing will defend herself sometimes, Starflight said. Not often, in my experience, said Mastermind. But why don't you stand back, just in case? He waved them a few steps away, settled his helmet over his head again, and flung open the door. Inside, a dragon was pinned to the wall. Chapter 6. Starflight was lucky his stomach was empty. It heaved perilously, and he had to cover his eyes and take a few deep breaths before he could speak again. The rainwing was the sad gray color of the chains that had bound Starflight in the Sky Kingdom, the first time he'd been separated from Sunny. She drooped against the wall, her wings outstretched and secured in place. When he was able to look again, he saw that what he'd thought were pins were actually clamps, holding her where she was, but not going straight through her wings as he'd first thought. Not that anything about this is all right.
What are you doing to her?
Fate Speaker cried. She bolted into the room and lifted the rainwing's snout gently in her talons. The trapped dragon barely responded. This one is done for the day, Mastermind said. We were testing to see whether they run out of venom at some point, if they shoot it for long enough, but she fainted before we could get any really useful data.
She needs water,
Fate Speaker said, glancing around the room, then looking straight at Starflight. He hesitated, remembering Fjord and Crocodile again. If this dragon did suddenly spray venom at them, he wouldn't blame her. But he didn't want to be in the way when it happened. Starflight, Fate Speaker said, and the tone of her voice reminded him again so much of Sunny that he couldn't say no to her. I'll get some. He flew to one of the pipes on the desalinization machine, where he'd seen a faucet earlier, found an empty cauldron that smelled clean, and filled it up. Fate Speaker had one of the prisoner's wings unclamped by the time Starflight got back. Mastermind stood in the doorway, watching through the holes in his helmet, but neither interfering nor helping. It was hard to know what he was thinking with his face completely hidden. Starflight brushed past him and set the cauldron down, then unclamped the dragon's other wing. She slumped forward so suddenly that both Fate Speaker and Starflight were nearly knocked over, but they managed to catch her and lean her wings over their shoulders. Fate Speaker held the cauldron up, and the rain wing revived enough to drink a little. "What's your name?" Starflight asked her. She coughed and looked sideways at him. "No Nightwing has ever asked my name before," she whispered hoarsely. "It's Orchid." "Oh," Starflight gasped, then closed his mouth quickly and glanced at the door. Mastermind was leaning into the hallway, yelling, "Strong wings! Strong wings, you blockhead, get up here!" "Mangrove is looking for you," Starflight whispered hurriedly. "He hasn't given up. He'll be here to rescue you soon." Fate Speaker stared at him, as if he'd just peeled off his scales and revealed a hippo underneath. But Orchid lifted her head, her eyes flooding with hope. A shimmering rose pink spread over her, starting on her chest and drifting out to her wingtips. "Soon," she said softly. "Then I can hang on until he comes." "I hope it'll be soon," Starflight thought. "I hope he doesn't die on his way here. I hope Glory survives too. I hope my friends are planning to rescue me as well." Fate Speaker's expression was 10 kinds of confused. She tilted her head as if she was listening, and Starflight realized with a jolt of panic that he'd been having several unguarded thoughts since they'd started this part of the tour. He'd forgotten. How could I forget? To worry about having his mind read. But his father hadn't reacted to any of his thoughts. Mastermind looked as pleased as ever. Not a mind reader, then, perhaps. Maybe those kinds of powers aren't genetically dominant in us. Maybe it is enough just to be smart like him. He'd always thought all Nightwings could read minds, and all Nightwings could see the future. That's what it sounded like in the scrolls he'd read. But Glory thought maybe it was only some of them, and perhaps she was right. Maybe I'm not completely defective. 3 moons! Mastermind barked from the doorway. "How did you turn her that pink color? I've never seen any of them look like that before." "That's because it's the color of happiness, and there's no happiness on this twisted island." Starflight met Fate Speaker's eyes. "I think she's just grateful for the water," Fate Speaker said, blinking at him. He didn't have to read minds to guess she was thinking, "We'll be talking about this later." "Fascinating." Mastermind came over and prodded the scales on Orchid's neck with one claw. She closed her eyes. Her color didn't change. "Utterly fascinating." A burly Nightwing slouched grumpily in from the balcony. Half a lizard hung from one corner of his mouth, and his shoulders were almost too wide for his wings to fit through the door. "What?" he mumbled, chewing. "This one can go back," said Mastermind. "Oh, and Strong Wings, guess what? This is my son." He waved gleefully at Starflight. Starflight wished he could go back half an hour in time, to when he'd been just as happy about those words as Mastermind was. Strong Wings gave Starflight a dubious look. "Huh," he said. "All right. So when do I get a helmet like that?" He nodded at the thing on Mastermind's head. "This is just a prototype," Mastermind said. He turned to Starflight. "As you can imagine, the hardest part of creating venom-resistant armor is coming up with a solution that protects the eyes but still allows one to see. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I must admit I'm stymied. This is a thoroughly imperfect solution." He tapped on the helmet with his talons. Peripheral vision is negligible at best, and of course venom could still splash through the holes if one were unlucky. He shook his head. There must be a more ingenious approach. Whatever, Strongwings grumped. Where's her band? Mastermind waved to the corner, and the muscular Nightwing picked up a heap of metal and one of the spears. He brought it over and fitted a kind of muzzle around Orchid's mouth, twisting the lock into place with a practiced flick of the spear tips. Then he shooed Starflight and Fate Speaker aside, snapped a chain around the Rainwing's neck, and gave it a yank. Without protesting, Orchid followed him out of the room. But why are you doing this? Starflight blurted. Why study their venom at all? Mastermind pulled off the helmet and gave him a confused look. It's science. We're expanding dragon knowledge. There's got to be more to it than that, Starflight said. Why is this so important? Why do you need venom-resistant armor? The Rainwings would never have bothered you if you left them alone. His father shrugged. The Queen has her reasons. I have mine. I don't get involved in her plans. For me, scientific discovery is reason enough. Starflight looked at the clamps on the wall, then down at the floor, too sickened to ask any more questions. Well, I wish I had time to show you more, Mastermind said, setting his helmet up on a shelf. But my daily scheduled meeting with the Queen is upon me. Do you get to see her? Starflight asked. No, said Mastermind. 3 moons, no. No one sees the Queen. Not for the last 9 years or so. She's very private. Really? Starflight thought. I wish I had some more progress to report, Mastermind mused. But telling her about you will certainly be a triumph. Come back tomorrow, and we can get to know each other better, yes? He wrapped his wings around Starflight and hugged him, not waiting for an answer. It was fantastic to meet you, son. I am so very proud. He ushered them out the door and locked it, then slid away toward a tunnel at the far end of the balcony. Starflight glanced along the row of doors, imagining tortured Rainwings behind each one. Wow, Fate Speaker said. So, turns out we might be horrible. I did not foresee that at all. Starflight sat down, his shoulders slumping. I believed everything I read. About Nightwings being so noble and brilliant and perfect. I can't understand this. So, where have you been? She asked curiously. You're not like them. And who's Mangrove? I was raised by the Talons of Peace too, he said, hoping he could avoid the Mangrove question by distracting her. Actually, I'm the one in the prophecy. Or I was. I guess I'm expendable, since they're replacing me with you. What? She took a step back, fluttering her wings. Wait, I never saw you. I lived right in the Talons of Peace camp. We were kept hidden, Starflight explained. Under a mountain. No one was supposed to find us. There you are. Morrowseer landed beside them with a thump. If you're quite finished with your little chat, there are other pressing matters we could attend to. I'm not finished, Fate Speaker said, whirling toward him. He's all special and chosen too? How can we both be in the prophecy? Only one of you will be, said Morrowseer. But that's why you're both here, so that we can decide which